Welcome to the Masterclass, GI Distress and Endurance Athletes. My name is Bob Seebohar. I'm a sport dietitian, exercise physiologist, strength and conditioning specialist, and a master's athlete who was plagued with GI distress way back in the days. Been there, done that, still managing it, so I definitely understand the trials, the tribulations, and the pain of GI distress. So wanted to provide you this masterclass so hopefully you as an endurance athlete can take charge of your GI system and GI distress and or any GI conditions you have, and hopefully turn that around and eliminate it and get the GI distress monster out of your life forever. So when I first began endurance sports quite a while ago, I was told, because I had GI distress, I was told that just having GI distress as an endurance athlete was just a rite of passage, right? Oh, it'll happen. It's normal. It's completely normal. Don't worry about it. You just have to deal with it. That's what people told me, like professionals, health professionals told me. And, of course, true to my nature, I didn't really want to accept that. One, because I was experiencing the pain of GI distress. And two, I just knew there was something that could be done. So hence the reason I am bringing you all this great information. Now, remember, though, GI distress is not normal, right? If there is distress in your digestive system, something is happening that is abnormal, so it needs to be fixed. Keep that in mind. It's not just, oh, my stomach doesn't feel good. If it chronically doesn't feel good, or there are certain triggers, need to do a couple steps back and take a couple steps back and say, wow, what is the root cause of this? Like, what's really going on? Okay. Now, where am I going on this short masterclass? Well, we're going to talk about GI distress. Obviously, we're going to talk about causes of GI distress, how to improve your digestive health, because this is one thing a lot of athletes, as a sport dietitian, a lot of athletes who I work with who have GI distress, they say, just fix it. Just help me fix it. Well, part of fixing GI distress is actually improving your digestive health first. Right? It's not just about, like back in the days, we used to just say, oh, well, don't use this sport nutrition product, use this one instead. It's not about that. We actually have to improve our digestive system health first. Then we look at different sport nutrition products, foods, so on and so forth during training. Also going to talk about metabolic efficiency training and GI distress. And then we're going to finish up with GI distress and the master's athlete. And master's athlete, I'm going to define, if you are over 40 years old, you are a master's athlete. And then obviously I'll provide you some next steps. All right, let's get into it. So GI distress, 30 to 90% of athletes experience some type of GI distress. It's most prominent in athletes in running and cycling, and then outside of endurance sports with weightlifting, but it's more common in athletes who participate in longer duration, higher intensity, in higher environmental temperature activities. So it's just perfect for endurance athletes, right? Because we're usually going out a little bit longer and we've got more time for the gut to be not so responsive, right? There's not a single cause or etiology for GI distress because it is so complex. In fact, when I work with endurance athletes with the goal of trying to fix or eliminate GI distress, it is usually a couple month process at minimum, because think about it, right? First, we have to identify the triggers and the causes based on symptoms. Then we have to kind of go backwards and we have to improve digestive health first. Then we have to implement different nutrient timing systems and strategies for obviously exercise, training, and competition. And then we have to enter a maintenance phase, because because here's the thing with GI distress. Once you have it, it can always come back, right? Because there are certain triggers. So I do want to let you know, so GI distress is a big monster, right? But I want to tell you the differences between IBS, which is intestinal bowel syndrome, versus IBD, intestinal bowel disease. So IBS, so if someone says, oh, hey, I have IBS. IBS is just signs and symptoms of distress. So that could be nausea, vomiting, bloating, diarrhea, reflux, flatulence, and GI bleeding, right? Those are signs and symptoms. IBD is a certain disease of the intestinal tract, and that's like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, right? So when you're looking at this, or maybe your own GI distress, do you have signs and symptoms which would fall under more IBS, or do you have a disease of the intestinal system, which is IBD? Okay. All right. So there are signs and symptoms of GI distress, right? There are also GI conditions. So a lot of these conditions are a little more severe than the distress. Now, here's what I mean. Maybe sometimes you have some bloating, but it's not consistent. Maybe you have some trigger foods, like it's going to happen. Okay, this food is going to bloat me. I know it. I'm going to do it anyway for whatever reason. That's fine. That's not what I'm talking about. The distress, usually GI distress, kind of comes and goes, or it's just like specific, like it only happens when I run. Like I only feel like I have runner's trots, or I get runner's trots, diarrhea, when I run. But outside of that, I'm fine, right? That's more signs, symptoms of GI distress, specifically IBS. Now, conditions are a little more, I don't want to say severe, but complex, because they include symptoms of GI distress, but they're more complex. So these conditions that you may present with include gastroparesis, reflux, indigestion, something called functional dyspepsia, aerophagia, constipation, SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, carbohydrate intolerances. The list goes on. There's a few more there to that list, but these are the more popular GI conditions that you actually may present with if your GI distress symptoms are not haphazard. If they are consistent, you may actually have one of these conditions. And if so, it's not a disease, right? It's not like IBD, but if so, you need to pay more attention to the conditions. Now, I'm not saying you need to pay less attention to GI distress, signs and symptoms, but once you have a condition like reflux or functional dyspepsia, like you really have to put some resources into that, because it takes longer to fix the gut when you have one of those conditions. Okay. All right. So here are some potential causes of GI distress. There are mechanical causes. So maybe you're a cyclist or a triathlete and you're in that arrow position or that crunched over position and your organs are compressed. That can actually cause certain GI distress symptoms. Posture. So not straight up posture, but again, kind of that leaned over posture will sometimes cause symptoms. And then runners specifically, because the jostling movement, that's why a lot of cyclists don't usually get, or I'll say this, running is much more prominent to have GI distress than cycling, because with running, you're jostling up and down. There's a lot more things moving around that could cause potential GI distress. So there are mechanical. There are also neuroendocrine. So neuroendocrine, basically the first one is increasing SNS tone, sympathetic nervous system tone. What that means is when you go out to exercise, endorphins increase, your catecholamines, like endorphins increase, adrenaline increases. That actually increases the motility of the gut, so things usually move faster. That's why before a race, you get nervous, you get those butterflies in the stomach, you have to go to the bathroom, and that's why, is because when you get nervous, when you get that rush of adrenaline and endorphins in your body, what happens is it increases the motility, which means things move faster through your digestive system, okay? And with that comes altered hormonal responses of that increased sympathetic nervous system. So we've got number 2, neuroendocrine. Number 3, reduced blood flow. So whenever we train, and this is called the blood shunting response. Whenever you train, whenever you exercise, the blood shunting response basically describes the blood leaving your digestive system and going to your working muscles, which makes sense. If you're running or swimming or cycling or doing whatever, right? Your muscles need blood because blood carries oxygen and nutrients, right? So this is why a lot of times endurance athletes, when you eat something during training, while you're exercising, obviously, it doesn't sit too well because the blood, there's not a lot of blood in the digestive system to be able to process and start digesting that food, right? Hypohydration is another one. I cannot mention this more. As an endurance athlete myself, I know how poor we hydrate ourselves, right? It's just, I don't know why it is, but hypohydration or dehydration actually increases your risk for GI distress, which is really interesting, right? Water is a very necessary necessity for the digestive system to actually work well. So, don't just, if you're going to go out for a couple hours, don't just say, hey, it's fine, I don't need any water, right? You may not need water from a physiological standpoint, but from a digestive standpoint, if you have GI distress, you need to bring water with you. And then finally, environmental stress. It could be cold, it could be hot. Usually the two on the polar opposites will kind of attract GI distress with the symptoms a little bit more if it's really hot or if it's really cold, because there are different digestive issues for the different environmental conditions. And then lastly, which we should not discount, is psychological. So when we feel stressed or anxious, it actually increases the motility, which is, again, passing things through our digestive system. And things cannot go well if that is always the case, right? Because you could have diarrhea for quite a while, or that could actually trigger certain GI conditions. So a lot of times, I know it sounds funny because you're thinking, wow, GI distress has to do with food. Well, stress is actually a trigger, a mechanism that will alter your digestive system functioning, which then will affect the food that you introduce. So whenever an athlete has GI distress, I'm always recommending some ways that we can reduce stress, reduce anxiety to make sure that the sympathetic nervous system is not on overdrive all of the time, okay? All right, so how do we improve digestive health? Well, I'm just gonna give you a few things, what you can do. And remember, if you have GI distress, obviously you're listening to this masterclass for a reason. If you have GI distress, you need to improve your digestive health. First, you need to, step one, honestly, is figuring out what symptoms you have. If you have more of an IBS, which is signs and symptoms, or if you have more of a GI condition, which is a little bit more complex. That's step one. Step two, need to improve your digestive health. Oh my gosh, I cannot say that enough. So how do we do that? Just reduce added sugars as much as possible. It's just, you do not need a lot of these simple added sugars. And you can see those on the label because it actually says, there's a row that says added sugars. Keep those as low as possible, right? Eat fresh foods, eat whole foods, focus on protein and fruits and vegetables and whole grains, right? Not a lot of added sugars. That just messes up the digestive system. I kind of mentioned it earlier, but hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Drink water, drink fluids, please. That just helps everything in your digestive system work properly. Fiber is an interesting one because there are actually some GI symptoms and conditions where we don't want too much fiber, and while there are others where we do need a healthy amount of fiber. So it kind of depends on the condition. It's not that, like, fiber doesn't fix everything, because there are different types of fiber. There are soluble fiber, which adds bulk. It's kind of like once you introduce soluble fiber into your body, into your digestive system, as long as you're drinking enough water, it adds bulk. It kind of gels up a little bit and adds bulk to your stool. Insoluble fiber, what that does is it helps things move. So if you're constipated, insoluble fiber would be fantastic, right? So there are different types of fibers, and fiber is not always the end all, but it's a very important part of GI distress depending on what symptoms you have and what condition you may have. Now, an obvious one is if there's a food or a drink or an ingredient that triggers your GI distress, you have to identify it. And here's the thing. If you have GI distress and you're watching this and you're still scratching your head like, wow, I can't figure this out, here's what we need to do. We need to have you keep, yes, you've heard of a food log before, but you need to keep a food log in addition to a symptom log. So what GI symptoms are you having while you're eating or in between your feedings? And then also along with that is a bowel movement log. So all three, food, bowel movements, and symptoms. Those all have to be part of your log, your food log. Okay, keep that for at least 2 to 4 weeks, because then what you're trying to do is find a trend, and analyzing that trend to see what is going on. Is it the environment? Is it stress? Is it work? Is it family? Is it training? Is it specific foods that you're eating, right? Okay, the next one is meal timing and size. So here's the thing. Our body circadian rhythm really likes routine. When you introduce a different size meal, it could be more or less, it doesn't really like that too much, right? The digestive system likes doing what it does, and it likes being kind of on autopilot, right? So if you normally have moderate sized meals, try to keep having moderate sized meals and try not to have a humongous meal or a next to nothing meal, right? You want to be consistent with the timing throughout the day. whenever possible. I get it. Like work gets crazy. I get it. Training gets crazy. Totally get it. But try to be consistent with the timing as much as possible, but especially the size of your meal. Okay. And another one, I'm going to throw this out there, but it's much more complex. Focus on prebiotic rich foods. Now, prebiotics are fiber rich foods. Those are fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, seeds, right? Anything with fiber. Prebiotics help your probiotics in your digestive system do their job. So you can take as many probiotic supplements as you want. If you're not eating enough fiber to help the probiotics do their job, they're not going to work that well, right? So focus on prebiotic rich foods and then also probiotic rich foods. Now that's a tough one. And that's why a lot of athletes go to probiotic supplements, because usually not many people like things like fermented foods. So like yogurts and kimchi and natto and miso, right? There aren't that many good probiotic rich foods. And I get it. That's why a lot of us go to probiotic supplements. However, focusing on prebiotic and probiotic rich foods first before supplements is the name of the game, because they do wonderful things other than just like helping each other out. Okay. And I'm not going to mention that for the sake of keeping this masterclass at a reasonable length. And the last one is optimizing blood sugar. Why do you need to optimize blood sugar? Well, blood sugar is related to energy throughout the day, right? But why in you know what do you need to optimize blood sugar for GI distress? Well, let me talk to you about that. So optimizing blood sugar, or using the concept that I created called Metabolic Efficiency Training, which is basically this. How do we put carbohydrate, protein, and fat that we eat together in the right amounts and the right timing to improve our blood sugar response? Well, you may be saying, who cares? And maybe you haven't heard of my concept before, or maybe you have, and you're thinking, wow, I didn't know it had to do with GI distress. Well, here's an interesting little tidbit. I actually created metabolic efficiency training in the early 2000s because of GI distress. So I actually wanted to find a way to get rid of GI distress, both for myself and all the athletes, the endurance athletes I was working with. And what I did is I did a whole bunch of research, and I came up with some very simplistic ways to manage and to actually eliminate GI distress. And it's centered on controlling blood sugar. So why? What gives here? Well, when you control blood sugar, what happens is number one, your energy is pretty consistent throughout the day, right? But what also happens is you teach your body to use more of its internal fat stores as energy. Now, follow along with me. We store carbohydrate and we store fat in our bodies. We store a lot more fat than carbohydrate, which means we have very limited carbohydrate stores. I call this the gas tank, right? You have a very small gas tank, and that's carbohydrates. You have a very large gas tank for fat. If you stabilize and optimize your blood sugar, you teach your body to use more of its fat stores. So you tap from that gas tank, which is humongous, and you preserve your carbohydrate stores. So what we're doing is you're teaching your body to preserve your carbohydrate stores until you really need them, and you're teaching it to use more of its fat stores as energy. Why is this important? Well, here's the deal. If you teach your body to use more fat as energy and preserve carbohydrate, during training, you need fewer carbohydrates during training, during exercise, because remember, you're teaching your body to use more fat as energy, both throughout the day, but also during training. And if you do that, you minimize the feedings during training. And remember what I said earlier? Blood shunting response. Whenever you introduce calories to your body, could be liquid, semi-solid, or solid, what happens is your body needs to digest those, needs to metabolize those. When you don't have a lot of blood in the digestive system, it doesn't like to do that. So what happens normally, it triggers GI distress, nausea, indigestion, reflux, diarrhea, bloating, flatulence. You hear me, right? You know it because you're probably the athlete that gets that. I used to be there too, right? So It doesn't mean you need to go, we're trying to train your body to go out and not have any calories during training. That's ridiculous. I mean, there might be some training sessions you do that, and that's totally fine. But we're not trying to do that. We're trying to make your body more efficient in using fat as energy as much as possible, so you reduce the excess need for carbohydrate during training. So you're preserving your carbohydrate stores. Makes total sense. And guess what? It works. I've been doing this over 20 years. It works. It will get rid of your GI distress along with all the other things like improving your gut health, like following all those other steps, right? It absolutely works. Now, as we look at this though, we also have to play the age card, right? If you are older than 40 years old, you really need to lend me your ear really quick, because as we age, physiology, biology, there are changes, and there's also changes in our digestive system. So with us masters athletes over 40, and that's just a number. I mean, that's usually, I mean, that's how we're classified as masters athletes. Could be 50, whatever, right? We're all aging, right? So we need to pay attention to this. But as we get older, we have decreased saliva production. And you might be thinking, oh, so what? Just dry your mouth. Well, yeah, but saliva is necessary to begin the carbohydrate digestion process in your mouth. So if you have less saliva, you're actually not kickstarting the carbohydrate metabolism or digestion process when you eat carbs. So now it's going to take longer to digest your carbohydrates, right? As we get older, we also have this thing called slower peristalsis. Peristalsis is basically the movement of stuff from here to the other end, right? It's how quickly things move through our digestive system. As we age, this slows down. Again, the slower it goes, the more chance we have for GI distress, GI distress symptoms and GI conditions, okay? The other thing is we have decreased stomach acid. Now, this may not seem like a big deal, except the stomach acid helps break down a lot of the food. Once the food gets down into our stomach acid goes like crazy, gets turned on overdrive, and it does its job. It helps to break down the food that we're putting down in our mouth through down the esophagus, right? So decreasing stomach acid means reduced time of increased time for digestion, because the stomach isn't digesting and being able to provide that chemical digestion as well, which means there's more food sitting in your stomach during exercise and training and competition, which means you have an increased risk for GI distress. And excuse me, lastly, we have reduced nutrient absorption, which means the nutrients we get in some foods might not be absorbed as well as when we were in our 20s and 30s, which means we are now setting ourselves up for more nutrient deficiency states, which is a whole nother issue, right? Because then it's all about what kind of foods do we eat when we get older if we're not going to absorb some of these nutrients, right? Totally get that. That's why we need to kind of stay ahead of the curve as we get older and really start implementing some of these things that I've been talking to you about so far: metabolic efficiency training, optimizing blood sugar, improving your digestive system health. Like, those are key things that you can start with. If you're watching this and you're under 40, you can start with this, right? Don't just fly over this slide. Right? You need to start thinking about, okay, how do I know maybe in a few years I need to deal with this. And for those of us over 40, we need to make sure every single day we're doing something to address the age-related decrease of our digestive system functioning, okay? So, really fast masterclass. I do apologize for that, but I wanted to give you a whole bunch of information. I want to get you thinking. Let me tell you this. GI distress and GI distress conditions, they're monsters, right? I mean, I work with athletes for months at a time trying to figure this puzzle out for them. But this masterclass will give you a jump start, right? You've got like the potential causes of GI distress as you learn: mechanical, neuroendocrine, reduced blood flow, psychological. You now have some explanation of maybe some of your GI distress symptoms, right? There's a lot of symptoms. There are a lot of conditions. your next step is to really figure out, well, what is causing these? Like, maybe, I mean, if you don't know your GI distress symptoms right now, you should probably figure those out. Like, write those down, right? Keep that food, that symptom, that bowel movement log. Figure out what's really causing this. Is it mechanical? Is it reduced blood flow? Is it psychological? Like, what is it, right? It's usually a combination of a lot of them, by the way. It's usually not one thing. And then from there, it's like, what are you going to do with this information, right? So I gave you some great tools, some great things to start working on. Food, symptom, bowel movement log, first and foremost, right? Identify what kind of distress symptoms you're having and try to put together the pieces of the puzzle to see when they are happening, right? Are there certain trigger foods? Are there certain trigger situations? Are there certain trigger seasons, like summer when it's hot and humid, possibly, right? Start to figure these out, and then you can start working on improving your digestive health with all those tips that I gave you, along with optimizing your blood sugar by utilizing the Metabolic Efficiency Training Concept. If you don't know too much about that, you can visit my website, energyperformance.com. There's some great resources. You can Google it, Google my name. You'll find a lot of resources online, from videos to articles, you name it, okay? Now, with that said, I think, positioning your next steps in terms of your resources, you have this masterclass. Listen to it over and over and over again, because here's the thing. Once you think you have GI distress managed, it's going to come back. Something is going to trigger it, I guarantee, right? The goal is to only have it trigger it in a very short time frame, so it doesn't stay too long. But then you realize, ooh, I had that food, I had that whatever, that triggered it. So now you can go back in your memory banks and say, okay, I forgot. I can't eat that food or that drink or whatever, right? So listen to this masterclass over and over, because it's not a one and done, right? There are a lot of tools in this masterclass that you'll utilize at certain times of your GI distress journey. Now, the other thing is self-study course, right? I created an entire eliminating GI distress in endurance athletes self-study course. It's an amazing resource. You can click the link below for more information. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. The third thing is Metabolic Efficiency Transformation Community. So what I did is I created an online community that focuses on athletes who want to improve health, performance, digestive health, right? Longevity, everything, by utilizing my Metabolic Efficiency Training Concept, which is, again, utilizing the concept or the goal of improving our blood sugar, optimizing our blood sugar, right? And then lastly, if you do need some one-on-one, obviously I'm here for you, right? We can do some one-on-one nutrition coaching. So you have 4 options on where to go next, depending on where you're at in your journey and your stage of change. If this masterclass is enough, great, fantastic, right? If you want to take the next step, like, look at my self-study course. I mean, obviously I'm very biased because I created it, but I created it as an endurance athlete, sport dietitian who has had GI distress, right? So I follow what is called a learn, apply, adapt model. So in this course, which has learning modules everywhere from like the physiology of digestion to the types and causes of GI distress, the different conditions, what to do about the signs and symptoms, what to do about certain conditions, right? I talk a lot more about metabolic efficiency training and a nutrition plan to support GI distress. And I talk a lot more about what we need to do as masters athletes for GI distress and GI health. And then lastly, I talk about nutrient timing strategies for our before, during, and after training feedings and getting food in our system. Because guess what? When you have GI distress, the typical nutrient timing strategies that all these professionals are saying out there, they don't work for us with GI distress. So I'm going to present a GI distress nutrient timing system also. And then throughout this self-study course, you will have transformational activities that will help you identify where you're at in your GI distress continuum or journey, if you have a condition or just the signs and symptoms, and specific strategies of how to implement certain nutrition, and really just focusing on nutrition, but a little bit of stress management and exercise too, on getting rid of GI distress forever in your life, okay? So that's my self-study course. Highly recommend it. Click below. There's a link somewhere where you can just learn a lot more about this course. That is a great resource. I actually think that should be your next step, because you can do it on your own if you're a DIY kind of person. You don't need a lot of attention or hand-holding at first. It's a great opportunity. The Metabolic Efficiency Transformation Community, as I told you about, it's a monthly community. Every single week, I'm doing something in the community. I'm either presenting master classes, we're doing live Q&As with me. I'm giving a whole bunch of resources and strategies, and just, it's a community where it's like-minded athletes coming together to gather, to share, to support each other, but also to have my supervision and my leadership to help you improve your health, your fitness, your GI system functioning, and your GI health continuum and journey for the rest of our life. So again, there's a link somewhere below that you can also find out a little bit more about my Metabolic Efficiency Transformation Community. Highly recommend that. That's a no-brainer. Like, seriously, we all need support in our lives. This is a great way to get that extra support and learn at the same time, right? And also, I mean, let me just toot my own horn. I mean, to have an expert in your corner, like, it's like having a sport dietitian in your back pocket. That's the community, right? You ask questions, get answers, engage with me, engage with the other community members. Makes total sense. No brainer, right? Okay. Finally, I want to say thank you for attending this masterclass. Watch it over and over and over again. Please, like, with GI distress, it's not as easy as saying, oh, I'm going to take this probiotic supplement and everything will be good. It's not like that, right? It's smoke and mirrors if anyone tells you that, right? There's a system, there's a process to fixing GI distress. What I've presented in this masterclass will definitely get you started. It'll kind of kickstart your journey, but it'll also kickstart and your process of getting rid of GI distress. Now, there are never guarantees in life, but I can tell you, I've worked with hundreds of athletes, including myself, obviously, and it works, right? Sometimes it takes a little bit longer than you expect, right? GI distress, fixing it definitely is a lesson in patience, right? But we can do this together. You can do this on your own. You've got some great resources from this masterclass. Reach out to me, visit energyperformance.com, check out my self-study course, check out the Metabolic Efficiency community. You've got so many great resources now. I want to thank you again for attending this masterclass, and I want to wish you the best of luck as you engage in your digestive health journey and getting rid of GI distress forever in your life. Thank you again for listening.